All right, seventh year over F fans. Holy cow, have we got a show for you today? I don't, to start with this guy's accolades is there would be too many to list in just one show. But here's a guy that came out of Can Am, made his mark, got a ride in Formula One, made it to Indy. He's not only did he make it to Indy, but he won the Indy 500. He sat on the front row with the Dream Team back in '88 and won the kart championship. He's driven some DTM stuff. He's driven some NASCAR stock cars. He's an FIA steward. He was part of the Red Bull driver search program for a while. This man is, and you already know him from the promos for the show, but he's got those movie star looks and personality that he had then. He's still got them now, and he's taken the time out of his crazy busy schedule to sit and chat with us today. So without any further ado, our new friend of the show, Mr. Spin to Win, 1985 Indy 500 winner, Danny Sullivan. Danny, welcome to seventh year over. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you. That was a hell of an intro. I appreciate it all. I don't know
Well,
about the good luck stuff, but there we go.
heck, come on now. It's like fine wine, right? You get better with age.
Yeah. I'm trying to tell my wife that, but I'm not sure it's going anywhere. Anyway, all
Well,
good.
she in for a penny, in for a pound, right? There's
Exactly.
the it's like holding that foot flat into the corner, man. Once you're committed, you're committed.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Danny, I got to tell you, because I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time. Not, I mean, you always, I always associate you with those iconic Miller Brewing colors, not just that red and white scheme that you had on that '85 winning car, but also the gold, the switch to the gold series that you had there before you wound up going to Gallus and Pac West and all that stuff. But being a self-professed motorsports history geek, and with your history in particular, let's just kind of stroll back a little bit through memory lane, if you will. So I know you went through the Jim Russell School, and many of you listening to the show today kind of know Danny's background. He's that kid from Louisville, Kentucky, did all kinds of crazy stuff, including driving taxi cabs in New York City. But how did you wind up getting from the Jim Russell School, and then where's that gap that I can't put my finger on between there and Can Am? Because it's interesting. If anybody looks you up on Google or Wikipedia, there is hardly a mention of the Can Am era there. You got to like do a little bit more digging. But I know that whole Can Am and that meeting with Garvin Brown and that whole thing was a big impetus and a big catalyst to your career. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Well, when I did, my mentor was a guy named Dr. Frank Faulkner. Frank's been gone for quite a few years, but he was a family friend, a friend of mine growing up. And when I dropped out, my parents tried to get me to, he wanted me to do something with my life. So I talked him into going racing. And so he's on the advice of Sir Jackie Stewart, he sent me to Jim Russell School. Now, Frank knew, which is how I got my bug from racing. He had all the pictures on the wall, was best friends with Bruce McLaren, Ken Tyrrell, Jackie Stewart, Graham Hill, the list goes on, Jack Brabham, all that era. And I knew his son and daughter. I went to school with them. And so when we did finish the Jim Russell School, and it was like, okay, this guy's got some talent, and how do we go from here? Well, Frank was an academic pediatrician, so there wasn't a big, money over there. I had dropped out, had left my family. We had kind of fallen out at the time. And so there was no money there. So it was all about trying to raise money. So I did Formula Ford thanks to people like Augie Paps, Bill Kimberly from Kimberly Clark, that Frank knew from his racing days. And Frank was also the only independent member of ACUS at the time. So he didn't represent anybody specifically. He was an independent member for the US. And Frank, anyway, he got me, we started by hook or by crook, raising sponsorship, finding a little bit here, moved up to Formula 3, had some false starts, not very good cars, not very good money, but we just kept grinding at it. Eventually got the Modus Drive in 1975, finished second in the championship to Gunnar Nielsen. And this was just typical of the era and my career. So I signed with a team, Rapid Movements, who were big shipping and forwarding agents in England. And they were sponsoring a car. Form Atlantic had a really good team. And we're going to do the Form Atlantic series there in Europe. And we could convert the car just by changing the engine and the gearbox and run a number of Formula 2 races. So that was a pretty good season for me because I couldn't get a Formula 2 drive. I couldn't find the sponsorship to do it. Right before the season starts, everything had tightened down. They said, hey, we're cutting out the racing program. We can't afford it. So I was
Of
without
course
a
they did.
job. And so that's when it started bouncing around a little bit of Formula 2, got an Atlantic drive back in the States with Bluebonnet Foods. And that's where I ran into people like Doug Shearson. It was a great series, by the way, in 78. Had Ray Hall in it, Howdy Holmes, Keke Rosberg, myself, Jeff Wood, a lot of people in there, really good drivers and very competitive season. I did okay. Another story for another time on that. And then eventually bounced around a little bit more, did some more sports car stuff, and then got an opportunity to participate in the Can-Am because of the guy who helped save my career, Garvin Brown, who you mentioned. For those that don't know who Garvin was, who's now passed away, he got cancer quite bad some years ago and passed away. Garvin was the heir to Brown-Forman distillers. So that's Jack Daniels, early times, Veuve Clicquot Champagne, big brands.
Right.
Garvin
Southern
did it,
Comfort, if I remember right, was one of them too.
and Garvin did it all just personally. This wasn't a company involvement, but he went in deep on it, and we had a Can-Am team. It started off rough, got it all turned around. There's a book out there called Fast Lane Summer that Leon and Dutch Mandel did, and
Yes, sir.
anyway, but the Can-Am thing was really fantastic for me. It was a great series. Rosberg was in it again. Patrick Tambay, Teo Fabi, a lot of Americans, Al Holbert, Al Unser Jr., Ray Hall, Jeff Brabham. I mean, and the teams were good, and the series was very competitive. It was one of those things that once we realized what to do, we could buy a low, we could buy a car. We got a number of guys like Dave White, Paul Ziggy Hartis, who
Oh, yeah.
the main guys at Andretti. They were my crew. Well, Ziggy was crew chief, and Dave was kind of team manager, and we just had a great time. Did that. Then I got an opportunity to go back and test in Formula One for Tyrrell, who was one of the best friends for Dr. Frank. And so I went over there, and I worked as a gopher for Tyrrell in 1971 when I was over doing the Jim Russell School.
Oh, wow.
When they had Sir Jackie Stewart and Francois Sever, who was killed at Watkins Glen.
Yes, sir.
And, but I lived with Ken and Nora Tyrrell, got to know them. They asked me to come to this test. By the way, there was 10 other drivers in the test. People like, I don't think Teo was there, but Stefan Johansson, Bebe Gabbiani, there was a great group of people that were in it. And it was the group at the time, and I got in the test and I did better than everybody else. So I had to do another test in Brazil, and that's how I got into Formula One. And a lot because of Garvin again, because Ken was notorious. He wasn't going to pay me anything. So,
Right.
And I said, hey, I got to drive over here that's paying me. And Garvin said, I'll cover your salary if you get, I wasn't, independently wealthy. I needed the money to live and to travel. So anyway, that's how I got started. Had a pretty good season, ran into Doug Shearson at Phoenix. I was back in the States. Remember, they used to run the end of the season IndyCar race at Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
I was there, and he said, hey, Howdy Holmes is going to retire, and we've got Domino's Pizza as a sponsor. Do you want to come? At that same time, Ken Tyrrell was losing Benetton because he didn't have a turbocharged car, and it was the end of the turbocharged era. It was when BMW was coming in, Renault was coming in, and so forth. And Benetton said, we want to be with a turbocharged car. or team. And so the rest is history. I joined with Doug, and away we went.
And that was kind of the beginning of the end there, unfortunately for Tyrrell, wasn't it? When they lost Benetton, because Benetton obviously had some pretty big success, in that turbo era after they moved.
Yeah, Ken hung in there for a while and had some success, and a little bit here, a little bit there. Stayed with Michele Alboreto, who was a fantastic driver, and he did okay. But I think Ken believed at that time that Ford was going to come back into the game and rescue him. And but unfortunately at that time too, design wise and a little bit just presentation wise. And I want to be careful with that. McLaren, Ron Dennis, Williams, they were on the rise, and Ken wasn't. And in terms of taking his team and everything to the next level, he was old school about it.
Sure.
Had the timber yard, and these guys were building these fancy garages and places like that I shouldn't say garages, but factories where the teams were based, and Ken wasn't. And I
Right.
think if you're a sponsor, a big player, you come in, you see that, you kind of go, I like the presentation over here.
Yeah, present at that stage. Yeah, you're right. Presentation kind of took over, like you said, the McLarens and the Williams at the time, and all those. And yeah, Ken was a classic old school guy. He would just as soon be in the old shed, working on the cars, and then show up, and
But I
expect
want to, but,
that to
but
be
I will
good.
say one thing about Ken. Between of the probably of the teams that I've driven for, his and Penske were probably the two best organized teams that I ever drove for. There were a lot of people close, but it was organized. There was no question who was making the decision.
Hmm.
It was professional. The crew that he had there was fantastic. Everything was there was, okay, it may not have been the fanciest shop, okay, but everything was above board and everything was meticulously organized. And the most important, there was never a doubt who was in charge.
Yeah,
And
right.
he knew
And
his stuff. There's a reason. There's a reason that Jackie Stewart stayed there for all those years and won 3 world championships. I mean,
hmm
let's look at the numbers for Jackie too. Okay, think about this. In his entire career, he did 99 Grand Prix. 99. He won 27 of the 99 and 3 world championships.
right, right.
Give
There's a
me,
lot to be said for that.
yeah, give me those numbers all day long. You know,
All day, every day, and twice on Sunday.
exactly. And, because not many people have those kind of numbers or percentages. And Ken was brilliant at that stuff.
Yeah,
Of course,
that's for
Jackie,
sure.
of course, Jackie was also a master. He could drive just about anything on the limit and make it look easy.
That is true. He was a master of that, and it's unfortunate that Francois Sever didn't kind of follow in those footsteps, because I know that he and Jackie were pretty close, and I'm sure that gutted Ken too when that all happened back in the early '70s there. So, all right, so you had the opportunity with Tyrrell, then you met Doug, and you had the Domino's pizza car. I remember that as well. So that was '83 or '84.
84, 84. 83 was Formula One, 84 was Doug, 85 was when I joined Penske.
So, and that's where I'm going with that. It's like, so it was a 1 year kind of a deal with Doug. How did that transition happen from going from Doug's program to Penske? Was the funding not there? Would
No,
Domino's move in, or
the
did
funding
Roger
was,
Penske come and say, hey, Danny, you're raising some eyebrows here. You're getting some results, and how'd you like to come drive for me?
well, it's not quite that way, but Miller, as you mentioned earlier, was the sponsor, and um, Big Al was in the team, and Big Al wasn't real big on the promotion side or doing anything extracurricular, if you like. And for that, he was a true racer. I mean, Big Al was bless his heart, was as good as you can get, and fantastic character and a great guy to be around, and one hell of a racer. and they wanted a little bit more. And I beat Rick at Pocono for at the last lap for for the win to win the Pocono 584 for Doug. And when I say the last lap, he and I were racing wheel to wheel in the last lap, and I won the race. It wasn't like a last lap pass, but and Roger, to his credit, and typical as classy as he is, he called Dr. Frank Faulkner, and who he knew was my mentor, and he says, "Does Danny have a contract for next year?" And Frank said, I don't know. And I was still negotiating with Doug on some of the finer points, nothing major. I mean, Doug was a class act, and he and the family, Fern, Molly, everybody, I mean, great family. Dennis Swan was a crew chief. I mean, it was just a great place to be. And then I said no. So Roger called and said, can we meet? And that's how it happened.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
And it was a really tough decision because Doug had, pulled me out of, not the most successful Formula One team and given me an opportunity, and I delivered and they had delivered. And we remember that year we started off with a DSR1. They had designed their own car and it was terrible. Johnny Rutherford and I were at the Speedway. I think in fact, I'm being a little bit facetious, but I think in fact we were like our lap average was almost the same as our top speed.
Oh boy.
It was a bit of it was a nice, by the way, it was a nice car to drive, beautifully designed, but it just wasn't aerodynamically very good. So we got the Lola, and then I got caught in a crash in '84, so it was damaged. And then I couldn't do the next race with it, and it wasn't until Portland. And that's how we kind of started turning things around, when Cleveland, Santa Ana, and Pocono that year. And I think one of the other things that happened, let's go back if you don't mind.
Not at all.
In 1983, I was driving for Benetton, and we had done Long Beach Grand Prix. Okay. And that had been my second or third race or something. I did Brazil. And it might have been the second race or third. Anyway, and Luciano asked to meet me in Westwood in LA, and there was an area there that had remember the mailbox things? I mean, the paper stands.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's a place in Westwood, California, where UCLA is. For everybody doesn't know where I'm talking about, Westwood in LA. And there was like 30 of these. They had everything from the New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, everything all the way down. And we got there, and Luciano and I knew each other pretty well, but my Italian and his English were kind of on par. Okay, we could get by pretty comfortably at a dinner, just the two of us having dinner and stuff like that, with broken English and Italian. And so I brought an old friend, Claude Ravier, as a translator for me, because Luciano wanted to discuss something. I didn't want to lose anything in the translation.
Sure.
And he had all these papers laid out on top of the boxes. And he says, I see Danny's name in the paper, and I see Tyrrell's name in the paper, but I don't see my name in the paper. And he wasn't worried about Luciano. He was worried about Benetton, the brand, being in
right.
Because they were just coming into the United States
mm-hmm.
at that time, or they were pretty new here. And without translating, Claude said, in America, you need for Danny to have a PR agency to getting the exposure that'll get you the exposure.
Right.
And he said, Luciano just said, great, get Danny a PR agent. and all this, and I'm going, Claude, what did you all just say? Because I understood, that much of it. Okay.
Sure.
And he told me, and we went to meet a guy named Alan Neerob, who nobody know, but he worked at a place called Rogers and Cowan. He's now the CEO there, and it was a media company for PR marketing for basically the movie, TV, and entertainment industry. Okay.
Gotcha.
The only other athlete he had was Ozzie, what was it? Ozzie Smith for the played shortstop for St. Louis.
Oh, yeah. The Cardinals, right?
Yeah. And so I met Alan and we got along great. And he said, okay. And they made the deal, what it cost, Benetton to do it. And that's how it started. Here's part of this is why I'm giving you the long story, but this is how it started. So he got me a tremendous amount. I only raced one more time in America, which was Detroit Grand Prix.
Mm-hmm.
But he got me so much exposure that when I went to IndyCar, okay, all that kept going and kept filtering over, and I get all the exposure. And then Miller's over here going, hey, who's this guy?
That's getting all this exposure, and what
Getting
can
all
they
this
do for our brand?
exposure. And Big Al didn't want to do it. So, and then I'd proven that I could win. I won a road course, I won a short oval, Sand Air, and I won the Pocono 500. So it was kind of like, okay, this guy's got the stuff. So, and I'm not saying that it was all that simple and it wasn't all about the PR. You still had to have the driving and all that. But remember this also, that after I got the drive, Big Al was our teammate at Indy. Every year I drove for Penske.
Yeah.
Like one year he won it. One
Mm-hmm.
of the years there he won it. I forget which year, but he won. Remember that was the famous year where they took the car off of the showroom
Out
of
of
the Sheraton
right.
Hotel or whatever it was
Yeah, that was
in
87.
Reading, Pennsylvania.
Because
Yeah.
I remember what, in fact, the one for all the years I've either been watching it on TV, I remember the shot of you after Guerrero had the clutch problem late in the race, because he was like basically a lap up on Big Al. And I remember seeing you hanging over the pit wall, cheering him on. You had the aviator glasses on, and you're like, willing him forward. And yeah, lo and behold, here's the guy that winds up being almost an unlikely 4-time winner with a car. He didn't even have a drive earlier in the year, because I think Angias was in the team that year, and he got hurt.
Yeah.
So then they brought that car out of the motel lobby in like Reading, Pennsylvania or something like that, and they got Big Al going.
No, it was and he was by the way, Big Al, and I'm going to tell one great story for me. My first IndyCar race was back in '82. I just did a couple for Jerry Forsythe. And the first race was at Atlanta. And Atlanta's fast. Okay. This was 1982. I think Rick Mears had the pole at like 210 miles an hour. 1982.
Wow. In 82. Holy smokes.
Yeah. And so, and it was a quick, even for I think for the NASCAR guys, it's still their fastest track, I think.
I think you're right.
Close to it. Anyway, and I remember we were lined up, and I couldn't hit my ass with both hands during the practice. It's an oval. I got very little oval experience. I had none, to be honest with you. And he goes, I come out of the Porto John, getting ready to walk down the qualifying, and I see Big Al. And I said, hey, man, and I knew him from the Can-Am, and I'd known him, and he and Mario had helped me get Garvin Brown to back me. Okay.
Interesting.
Another story back up. We can go back to that if you want to. Anyway, so I said, hey, man, he said, Danny, look, I wouldn't tell most guys this, especially rookies, but he said, you're driving like you're driving a road race. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, when you come to the first corner, you lift off there and touch your brakes. He said, you got to carry your speed down into the corner and then roll out of the throttle, get it set in the middle of the corner and come on, get back on the power and come off. I'm simplifying it a bit. And he said, ask Wally for 3 warm-up laps. Because, you go out and you get 2 laps and then you're on the green. You could ask for a 3rd lap if you wanted to. So I asked Wally. So in those days, the Cosworth revved to like 10,800. Okay. My first lap, I go down in there at like 7,000 RPM and kept the throttle down. Not, it's not that fast, but kept the throttle down just to get used to it.
Sure.
Rolled out of it like he told me and went. Next lap, 8,000. Next lap, 9,000. Green flag on it. Qualified 10th. Finished 3rd in the race.
Nice.
But if it hadn't have been for Big Al, I would have never figured it out until maybe the race. when I was following somebody, but he helped me. He was a great on that type of stuff. And then he got to a point where, you beat him. He said, "I'm not telling you anything else."
I suppose it's all good until you're as fast or faster, right? Then the
Well,
secrets stop coming.
I don't think Al had to worry too much. I mean, he was so fantastic and such a quick driver, and clearly his record speaks for himself.
For sure.
But anyway, that's how a lot of all that stuff came together.
Wow, that's a great lead up to that. So, all right, so Big Al was a huge help, and I can't think of anybody that would say anything differently about Big Al. Everybody loved him, and he was that quintessential old school guy that was fast no matter what. And man, on his day, he was unbeatable. Just looking at that 87 race. But let's just back up a couple of years now to that 85 season. So that's your first full season with Penske, right?
Right.
And of course, everybody knows, because even your Twitter handle is spin to win 85. So clearly, I think, and I as a driver myself, I would be willing to bet that my guess is that you would rather be lucky than good on that day, and that's what it was, less than skill and other than just doing what you knew to do. And all of a sudden, you're pointed the right way in the short shoot between 1 and 2, and you're like, "Oh, I didn't hit anything."
Take my foot off the brake. Exactly right. I took my foot off the brake and was like, now what gear do I choose? Because remember, five-speed gearbox, manual,
Yep.
3 speed up gears to get out of the pits. Okay, and then everybody ran 2 top gears that were about 200, 300 RPM off maybe. So that if you were trying to save fuel and out there by yourself, you wouldn't rev it quite as high. But if you're racing somebody, you could do the other one. So the question is, I've spun, I've not hit anything. I'm now going short shoot into 2. What gear do I take to jumpstart this thing? So
And
if I go, well, you're a racer. If I go too low, it'll lock it up and spin me again. If I
right.
go too high, it could do the same thing, right? And as we sit here today, I don't remember which gear I took. But if you ever go back and look at the tape closely again, when I'm going through 2, when I get into 2, you'll see the car like that again. I almost lost it a second time.
So was that a checking your shorts moment after the race?
No, not because it happened on like lap 120, and then don't forget I had Howdy Holmes and he came back for the 500, and Tom Sneva going into 1, they tangled. Howdy went up, hit the fence, eventually Sneva, but when he spun, I figured something was going to happen because Howdy he'd get a little tired late in the race, and I started rolling off, and I thought Tom's not always there, So I started rolling off, going down into 1, and when he spun, normally they go up or go down. Okay, and he stayed right in the line. Sneva did, right on and right before, and I was like, you can't, if you jump on the brakes, then I'm going to spin.
Sure, right.
But I'm just kind of trying to, and right before I got there, he just went out of the way. So that one was going on. So now you're thinking about the reason I'm adding these things in. Okay, the spin happened in 120. I got to put that stuff behind me. That then happens, I don't know, 20, 25 laps later, something like that. I got to put that behind me. I'm thinking, boy, I dodged that one. I'm having a pretty good day here. Let's see if we can run down Mario.
How many lives are left in this cat?
Yeah, exactly. But also, when you're in the thick of that, you don't have time to dwell on what went on back there. It happened. Okay.
Right.
Now, if I watch the tape right now, if you pulled it up, I still get goosebumps watching it, even knowing what happened. But my point is, now you got to stay focused and back in the game. And there was a lot to go. And then we forget that 7 laps from the end, I've got a pretty good, not a big cushion, but you never have a big cushion there, but I got, 4 seconds or something on Mario, and Whittington's hit the wall.
I was going to say, then you got that late yellow, right?
And it's like, oh man, Mario. And then I look in my mirror, and it's like Michael behind me and some other guy and Mario. And I'm thinking, well, Michael's not going to hold him up at all.
Of course not.
Right? And I can't remember who it was who was in there in the mix. And I thought, oh boy, I got to do. I mean, and they gave a restart with 4 laps to go, and it was just like, okay, do not look in the mirror. Just
It's qualifying time for the last 4 laps.
you know what? My fastest lap of the race was 198.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, for
Exactly.
me that I did. My fastest lap of the race, and it was just one of those things. Go, go, go! Hit your, make your marks. Hit it. Just don't worry about anything. Just be smooth
Smooth
and
and inch perfect, right?
just stay on the gas as much as you can. And it worked out. But you don't have. There's so much that goes on in 500 miles, or for me anyway. I feel that
Mm-hmm.
in your cockpit, near misses, this, that, and the other. Even when your car's running good, near misses. I mean, don't think that was a near miss for Mario.
Right.
So, and how many other where the guy you think they're going to be out of the way and they go the other way or so. So you didn't have time to dwell on the spin.
Sure. Yeah. Cause you're right. In the heat of the moment, man, that your brain is working at 200 plus miles an hour. You got to get back in the game straight away. You don't have time to think about it.
Yeah.
So since we're kind of in the month of May series of shows here right now, and we're talking about the 500, and that being your first year with Penske, your first full season there, obviously you knew that the Penske organization was strong. You knew they had Rick. You knew they had Al Senior rather. Did you have any idea going into the month of May that you were going to be as strong as you were?
No, because I didn't qualify particularly well. I mean, I qualified eighth. Rick's always fast, particularly on the ovals. And even though I'd been with the team for when I signed was at the end of the year, and we'd done a lot of testing. But testing is one thing, going to races is the other. Remember, that was the year the early Phoenix race. Remember, they used to have one at the beginning, one at the end.
Yep.
The early Phoenix race was canceled because they had the track was really rough at the back, and they from some water damage, and they couldn't get it, and they couldn't fix it in time, and they tried to fix it, and anyway, it wasn't very good. And most of it is tested there, getting ready for it, but the track was too rough to have a good race. So we go to Long Beach. Okay, Long Beach, I'm leading coming out of the last corner, and ran out of fuel.
I
And
do
I
remember that.
And
I
then,
do remember
and then I
that.
got past like that, and the entrance of the pits, was right after the hairpin.
Yep.
But I kept thinking, well, it's slightly downhill. It kind of bends and goes a little bit down, not a lot, but it's not flat down to the checkered flag. Remember, it's around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I jumped out of the car and started pushing because I thought if I could get it to roll, I could get across. And I ended up finishing third. But the interesting thing is that picture of me pushing the car made, the front of the sports page and LA Times, New York Times, all that stuff. And then I show up at Indy. And that was really my second race. When you go to Indy with Penske, whole different deal as well. Because it's very professional. It's very organized. You don't feel any different. You just feel the difference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it's the
Roger's not in
speedway.
there. It's the speedway. And Roger's not in there like, okay, where's the five? There's nothing like that. It's the same intensity at all the races, but you feel the importance, one, of the Indianapolis 500, two, the importance to Roger Penske for the Indianapolis 500. And now you got maybe one of the best oval drivers ever in Rick Mears and Al Unser Sr.
Right.
So it was kind of one of those things that if you didn't put, as Rick said one time, you just got to keep putting numbers up on the board, and he wasn't necessarily talking about just posting the fastest speed. It was just like, Roger, as all great teams do, they expect you to perform. That's what they're paying you for.
That's right.
And so it doesn't matter what you've done before, what you've done last week, any of that stuff. It's right now. And
Right.
that's, and back then too, and I'm not saying that the change wasn't good, but back then, remember, the Indy 500 you were there for 3.5 weeks.
That's right. Yeah, it was the entire month. That's
Yeah.
right. And it's, it's funny because that 85 race that you won was actually my grandfather, who, God bless his soul. He's the man who's to credit for my interest in motorsports. He would actually take me down to the speedway. We went to the first speedway for the first time back in 75 when I was like 10 years old. And we would go down, I'd sit in the back of his station wagon. We would just go for qualifying. And the first race that I actually saw was your race in 85. And it was funny because we got seats in the short chute on the outside between 3 and 4. Right. And even though you may have a transistor radio with a cool little earpiece in there, when the crowd went nuts, when that whole thing happened with you and Mario up in 1 and 2, they didn't have the video boards back then at the
No.
time. So we're like, what the hell's going on? And then nobody crashed. There was like, I mean, yeah, there was yellow, but we're like, what's going on? What's going on? And we didn't realize until much later that it was because of what, with your spin there in the short chute, that was what caused it. And then we're like, damn, well, of course, the first year we're here, we picked the wrong place to sit. But
Well, those days you didn't have much choice. But
that's
I
true.
will tell you that was the last non-live broadcast. So you didn't have all the stuff that they had. And Derek Walker was my guy on the radio, the team manager. He was my guy on the radio. Well, he stood behind the big pit box, and the timers would sit up there timing, keeping a record of where everybody is on every lap and stuff like that. And he'd do all this stuff from behind. Well, he didn't know either. You remember Dan Luganville, the director of communication? So
absolutely.
Dan comes running in and he goes, in the side, he goes, "You will not believe what happened." And Derek's like, quiet. I'm trying to figure out because, there's a yellow out. Now, do we make a pit stop?
I was going to say, he's plotting strategy.
Yeah, he's doing strategy. He said he didn't know until the end of the race because like you guys up in 3 and 4, how would you? There's not, there wasn't, like you said, there wasn't the big screens up there. Nobody had their phone where they're doing
right.
the phone. So it was a funny time. But anyway, but I want to go back to one thing too about I want to make it very clear on one thing. The team was great, but just like anybody that you work with, okay, testing's one thing, but when you start doing races with the team and your mechanics and your pit crew and your Derek Walker and all that stuff, it takes a long time to develop and get that bonding going where everybody kind of says and knows what to expect from everybody else, particularly the driver to the engineer.
Yeah, that chemistry is critical.
Critical. And, if I come in and say, hey, I got a little bit of understeer in the car or a little bit of push, if you're, understeer road courses, push on the oval.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to the engineer, what's a little?
Right.
Some guys, a little could be this, or a little could be just that. So until you start developing those bonds and those relationships, it takes a long time to get there. And that's where Rick, as a regular teammate, was even better than Big Al because I had him with me at all the races and could help and so forth. So that was a big factor. And remember, Rick was coming back from that horrible accident and
his crash at Sanair, yeah,
with his feet. So, it took him a little time to, not that it ever slowed him down, but it took him a while to learn how to readjust and, get it all working.
Well, and it's interesting. You talk about the importance of that bond, especially with the engineer and that level of chemistry and communication. Even with my stuff when I'm coaching drivers, it's like, when I'll ask them to tell me what the car is doing in third corner, whatever it is, and they give me some kind of generic answer. And I remember there was one time I was at Road Atlanta with a guy I was coaching, and I asked him what the car was doing, and he gave me some BS answer. And I literally said, I'm like, that's bullshit. You need to give me more than that.
Yeah.
You need to give me more than that if I'm going to help you here. So start thinking a little bit deeper and give me some more specifics, really break it down. And, fortunately I was able to enjoy that with my last crew chief on the World Challenge stuff. But I absolutely understand 100% what you're saying. And especially at a place like Indy, where, minute wing changes change, drastically the handling characteristics of the car, not just on your own, but especially in traffic when you've got that much turbulence and stuff going on. I can absolutely appreciate that sense that you're talking about.
Yeah. But it's
Um,
it's an interesting place because sometimes you don't, I'll admit it, there were sometimes I didn't know whether, you laugh at this, but the corners are so long and you get into a certain stage in the corner and you go, okay, do I have understeer or push? Or did it start because the car was loose going in? And so you not steer into it, but you allow it to develop into this, or same thing, I'm loose, but, or I've got understeer and then I'm loose off. Is that because it just tipped over? Or is there something more on the aerodynamic? Is it a mechanical? Is there something off on the spring rates? The roll bars, anyway.
when it's
And
interesting
I,
too that you say that, because I mean, think about for all you listeners here listening to this right now. I mean, just what you described to me, Danny, you're processing this in real time at 200 plus miles an hour in the middle of a corner. So just think about how fast and how far ahead these drivers are thinking at that speed, not just that place. I mean, specifically that place for sure, but for you to be able to process that and slow it down mentally to be able to think about that and still prepare for the next corner is pretty amazing. The supercomputers that guys that compete at the level that you did are able to process that information. I think that's pretty amazing.
oh, thank you. Anyway, it's part of the program, but
It definitely is, and that's a big part of what separates the goods from the greats. In my opinion, interesting. Way just a call back to one other point that you made, because you referenced the fact that Phoenix they used to have that spring race there, and they couldn't have it because of the track conditions. But I also remember in that era, they would always say that if you ran well at Phoenix, it would bode well for you at Indy. And so when you didn't have that, sir, like you said, you had plenty of testing, but testing and racing are two different things. And not having that Phoenix kind of warm up, so to speak, for Indy must have had more than a few teams not quite sure what they had rolling into the month of May in those then 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks of practice and qualifying in the race.
well, there's one other factor too. You think that when you have, because, oh, I've got a whole week of qualifying, up until qualifying, the first weekend of qualifying, this is my day. And then I've got the second week if I've qualified to get the car ready for racing. But you get a mechanical problem. You got this little problem. You got a problem you can't fix, meaning balance wise. You can't find the problem. Then it rains. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that time surprisingly goes pretty quick if you're on the back foot.
When
Okay.
it seems to me too that it's pretty easy at that place. Maybe, I mean, to a slightly lesser extent because it's a much more condensed schedule now, but it seems like it's pretty easy to get kind of out of that sweet spot of where the car is really doing what you want it to do, and you're, the car's responding to the littlest of adjustments, and you can start to really be chasing your tail and wind up.
Big time. Hey, let's not forget Penske with two-time winners in Al Jr. and Emerson didn't qualify.
I was going to say fail to qualify. And wasn't
Yeah,
that the year after they had the big Mercedes motor that they failed to
yeah,
qualify?
yeah. And yet what was the guy? I can't remember the guy's name. I think he was a Japanese journalist qualified. And you got Penske and the two-time winners that didn't get in. So you hit the nail on the head. You can get just a little off, and at the speeds, it's hard to come back. And it just goes to show how competitive it is because everybody's a tenth off. Of course, there they use mile an hour, but it was like I remember coming in one time and it was like my teammates had run 228, something, and I was stuck at like 227 something, and it was like hell, I couldn't even get a ride back on the golf cart to the garage. I was that slow, and but it was like a tenth of a second or 2/10 of a second. It was like so minute, but that's what it takes there.
Yeah.
It's just and the field is usually very competitive. There's not a lot of spread between certainly in the top 20 cars, there's not a big spread, you know,
Right.
and that's what people forget. that it's pretty tight, you know.
You're 100% right. And it's, when you start getting, I mean, you've had the benefit of being able to start up front a lot there. And, I keep thinking, that front row shot from 88 when it was you, Big Al, and Rick on the front row, man, that was the dream scenario. I'm sure Roger and all the sponsors were happy as punch with that one. But when you're starting further back in the field, man, especially at the start, when you've got 33 guys, funneling down into that tiny little alleyway of what looks like turn one at speed, that's got to be not the easiest thing when, tires may not be fully warmed up. You may have to, temperatures on race day could be different, like they were in 92 when it was so damn cold that morning.
Yeah.
And not, it's like, let's get through the first lap here and let the field kind of spread out and settle in.
That's the big mentality, but you're also always worried about somebody that gets a little too racy on the first lap, certainly the first corner. And all it takes is them to touch.
Call back Kevin Kogan, anyone?
Well, I mean, listen, it's, Kevin was a really quick driver and a great guy. He just whatever.
It was a bad luck deal.
Yeah. Dealt with the pressure different than everybody else, and stuff happened. So
sure.
Anyway, I don't want
to. So when you move, all right. So obviously 85, I mean, the for lack of a better term, the hype train that followed Danny Sullivan to the Miller ride at Penske went freaking, apoplectic with the big win in 85. So all of a sudden now, anybody at that point that didn't know who Danny Sullivan was, everybody knew who Danny Sullivan was at that point. Did you recognize at the time that it happened what effect it was going to have on the rest of your career and your life? Or did it, did it take, when did it finally start to like click that like, holy shit, this really made Danny Sullivan?
When I'll tell you a story. You're wrapped up in the hoopla, and then Alan Neerob did his job. I did every morning show. I was on this, it was that. Everything was getting pulled, and you're off to here, and this TV show and that. Anyway, it was all good, but we don't forget we race at Milwaukee the next weekend.
Yes,
and that's Miller's hometown, so that was a big hoopla there. And then we go to Portland and da da da. And in July of that year, at the end of June, July sometime, I'm in the hotel in Jackson, Michigan, because we got a test out at the track. And I got up in the morning, normal stuff, got up, taking a shower, getting ready to go to the track. And I'm in the shower and I go, damn, you won the Indy 500. And it took until about then, you knew, and you had the ring on and all the stuff, and, gone to the award bank, da, da, da. And everybody's, slapping you on the back for winning the 500 and so forth. And, but it didn't sink in until that day. And then it was kind of like, gosh, and, and I'd already won the Pocono 500, but and I remember getting a flight someplace and a girl is checking me in at the deal, and she goes, "Are you the Indy 500 winner?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Did you know that or what?" She goes, "No, look, it's right here on the screen." And they had it next to my name on the I forget which airline it was, but they had it next to my name.
Oh, that's cool.
And you kind of go, they didn't do that when I won the Pocono 500.
Right.
But it is a Scotty Scheffler, the one yesterday and the Masters. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He's won 3 tournaments in the last 4 starts or something like that. But now it's different because he's the Masters champion.
Yeah. Everybody looks at you different.
Everybody's got it. And I don't want to say it's a credibility thing, because there's a lot of great racers that never won the Indy 500, but I mean, fabulous racers, but it does just take you one step a little bit higher in terms of the recognition. Even I beat people today. Here I am at, my age, 30 something years, 35 plus years after winning the Indy 500, people I was with somebody the other day, and they go, that guy won the Indy 500. The guy's like, really? You won the Indy 500? So it's a, they don't say, hey, you won two Pocono 500s and the Michigan 500, Indy 500. The
That's right.
Kentucky Derby.
Sure.
You know, it's, it's one of those events that just has you remember the name Alan Prost,
Oh, yes, sir.
four-time world champion. And I saw Alan, who I knew at the Detroit Grand Prix that year. I went up there just to see some of my friends and stuff. And he said, "Hey," he said, "how about I trade you a number of my Grand Prix wins for that Indy 500 win?"
See, even them,
you know,
those guys
yeah.
recognize it.
It was,
Yeah,
I mean, it was really cute way to say it, but
that's
because
awesome.
just because of its status.
Yeah,
And I
you
think,
bet.
to be honest with you, the racing that I'm seeing from IndyCar now, the guys that are in it are as good as anybody. The racing is fantastic, fantastic, and
Absolutely.
and I think it's only going to get better and get more competitive. I just think it's you and I, if we had the money and we wanted to do it, we can go start an IndyCar team. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to compete with RP or Chip or Michael or
Hmm.
even the other teams further down right away, but we have the capability to do it.
Right.
We can buy the equipment and so forth. If we can hire the right people and get it all going, you can you can get out there and do it.
And ultimately, and this, Danny, from all the years, whether it's within the racing industry or outside the racing industry, it doesn't matter, honestly, what industry it is. It comes down to the people and the relationships and the
Oh,
communication you build, whether it's Derek Walker, Dan Luganville, Roger Penske, Rick Mears, you name it. I don't care if you're running a restaurant or you're a paper boy or you're running, a world championship racing program. It ultimately comes down to the people. If you get the right people, and anything can happen.
well, look at Chip and Mike Hall. I
Hmm.
mean,
How long have those guys been together?
yeah,
Just 30
and
years, something like that.
yeah, and so I'm getting a little bit kind of, I don't know where we are. I didn't mean to screw up the.
No,
But
no, we're all good because I do want to get your take on the current state of IndyCar. I'm sure you probably paid attention to Long Beach since you've won there before, and that's a
yeah,
great track for you. But I would be far remiss, and it's kind of a fail on my part for not mentioning this in the introduction. Speaking of status, for those of you that don't know, Danny Sullivan's already a member of the Motorsports Hall of Fame, but coming up in about a month's time, a little over a month, he's also going to be inducted into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Hall of Fame. And I couldn't be happier when I heard the news, and I knew that we had a chance at having Danny on the show today. I wanted to make sure I gave him huge congratulations for that. It's much well deserved. I wish I could be there at the old timers dinner, I guess, is when they present that award to you. But who knows? Maybe I can track you down sometime during the month of May. But congratulations on your upcoming induction into the IMS Hall of Fame, my friend. Good job, man.
thank you. Great honor and really ecstatic about it. And
It's you and Wally this year, I think, are being inducted.
yeah,
Isn't that right?
yeah.
Very
So,
cool.
and I hope because Wally and I go back a long way because he was the race director back in the day,
Yeah.
and we lived not very far from each other in Colorado, and used to go on his ride. And I mean, Wally was a really good sounding board too. He was a guy, the way Charlie Whiting was in Formula One, where you could go and have a conversation with him, and he wasn't going to let you get away with anything, but he was a good sounding board about doing this or doing that. So
Right. And he'd hear you out.
I'm really exciting, and I'm really excited about that. But more importantly, I haven't been back to the 500 for about 5 years, so I'm very much looking forward to the race and getting back and seeing everybody and seeing the crowd. And I think it's going to be spectacular this year.
I think it is too. And before we jump into that, let's just kind of I don't want to cut your stellar IndyCar career short because man, you were running a hot streak there from 85 through about 89, 90, man. You won the championship in 88.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't have been better. So towards the end of the Penske run, how did that all occur when when you started making the switch and all of a sudden Roger started making changes? What
It was,
precipitated all that, and how did that happen?
I mean, I can't speak for Roger, but there was, we had Rick Emerson and myself in the team, and I had a good run with them. I won a bunch of races one year, I think more than Rick and Emerson. And but as in a lot of it comes down to Rick, as he still is, was never going to go away from Penske. Roger was never going to get rid of Rick. Not that, and nor should he have. But Emerson was a lot of the reason that Marlboro came to the team. So when Pennzoil was pulling out, I was the guy with the short straw.
Gotcha.
and,
Gotcha.
there was really, and to be honest with you, as great as the Penske organization is, and as much depth in personnel that they had, when you've got three guys like Rick, Emerson, and myself in a team, and you're trying to run a three-car team with three guys that are that competitive and pushing, it's a big strain on the organization to just have that kind of demand and that kind of competitiveness.
Well,
And then
I'm sorry, go
when
ahead.
Penzo pulled out or was pulling out, I think it kind of made the decision a little bit easier for Roger.
Well, and it's, like you said, when you've got three guys as competitive as you guys were, it's like in Formula One, it's like you got three number ones on the team. It's like,
Yeah.
and how do you keep three number ones satisfied?
Yeah. And it's, look, in Roger's mind, there might have been other factors. Maybe I wasn't, delivering as much or whatever. I don't know, I'm just saying that it was just one of those decisions. And I took it as look, I didn't want to leave where I've been and won so many races and championship and had a lot of friends and so forth like that. But, it's a business.
It is
And
business. It's kind of like those pro football players that sign with another team in free agency. It's business is business.
yeah. So, but look, I look back on all my time with Team Penske and all that, and even a lot of the family members that I got to know and so forth. I look back on with all fond memories. I still see Roger. He and I were texting 2 days ago, so it's all good, and I can't complain. I had a fantastic career. Would I've liked to have won more? Everybody wants to win more,
100% they do.
but
Yeah.
I look back on it and think what a fantastic time and what a great career I had, and I'm thankful. And I'm sitting here being able to talk on a podcast and looking forward to going up and being in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I'm hopeful that I'll actually get to see it. I know you're going to be mobbed by everybody at the Speedway, but hopefully I'll be able to see and maybe get to shake your hand and say thanks in person. But let's talk a little bit. Speaking of that, and certainly, and I feel like just to put a bow on the Penske era for you, I really feel like, from what I know of your history with them and everybody else, and Rick included, it's kind of like once you're part of the Penske family, you're always part of the Penske family, even if you're not driving there anymore. I mean, I've got a good friend of mine whose dad was Bill Alsop that ran briefly for Penske. And when Bill passed away a few years ago, Roger sent him this cool little, hardbound book with some notes, handwritten notes of thanks and some, bits of memorabilia about Bill. So I know Roger, even though he's that guy is probably one of the busiest guys, especially at his age. I don't know how he pulls it off, but he is a master organizer, and he is active and is on top of everything that he is with everything that he's got going. Is a pretty amazing guy. But so talking about the current state of IndyCar, obviously we touched on Long Beach, we talked on the talent, and I don't know about you, but it seems to me like, and I felt this way last year, and I feel it even more so this year, this is probably one of the strongest, deepest fields in IndyCar in a long time.
I would agree with you. I think it's as competitive as we've seen it. I think there's more teams that have the chance to win. They're all raised their level, and I don't think it's being dominated by two teams as it has been sometimes in the past. And I think uh, okay, you know, the top teams had a good run this weekend, but Colton had a shot there for Andretti, and McLaren's going to come on strong again, and I think you're going to see a lot of competitive racing. Look at what Elio did.
Yeah.
With those guys, they're a great team. I mean, Meyer Shank, fabulous team. So you can't count anybody out. And I think that's what makes IndyCar so exciting. Great talent in drivers, but also in the teams.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and you hit it on the head. It used to be where, you could pretty well count on things being, either Penske, Ganassi, Andretti, and then after that there was the fairly noticeable drop off. And now that's not the case. I mean,
Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan, those guys are strong. Everybody.
yeah, like you said, Meyer Shank, and I mean, even you've got AJ with Kirkwood doing some
Yeah.
great things. He's showing
Yeah.
some real flashes. It seems like.
Yeah. So.
All right. So I know you're on a tight time schedule here, Danny, and I don't want to run out my welcome with you today, but let's just touch real quick on your FIA steward stuff and F1 here before we let you go. How did that opportunity to be an FIA steward come about, and how's that playing out? How's that doing? What are you doing with that these days?
Well, I'm still going to do 4 races this year. I'm going to start in Miami and do Silverstone, probably Monza and Mexico City. And they wanted somebody. Charlie Whiting started this because they had a bunch of stewards that nobody had a background from Formula One. So years ago, I don't know, 17 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, he introduced a driver steward into the program. So you have a chief steward, a second steward, and a driver steward, and then one from the local ASN. Now, sometimes the local ASN guys, it could be Tim Mayer, from the US or whatever. So it's a strong group. And our job or position is that we're supposed to look at it from a driver's perspective, and we have all the data from, believe it or not, from throttle traces to steering input to brake pressure. You got every camera angle they can pull up. I mean, there's more data than you know what to do with. It can almost overwhelm you with data. But our job is to try to give a fair shake from the driver and then listen if the opportunity presents itself where we can bring somebody in afterwards. Sometimes you're trying to do it in the race so that they can basically, if you're going to give a 5-second penalty or an even 10-second penalty, they have a chance to change their strategy and still recover and maybe score some points. Okay, so you try to do it, but if it's something that requires to interview them afterwards to give them a fair shake, then you want them to come in and give their 2 cents worth of what happens. And I got asked to do it. This is, I think, I didn't do a lot during the first year in the pandemic because I could travel to the races, but the quarantine coming back was the problem.
Sure.
And then I did 3 races last year, and then I'm back on 4 to 5 this year. And there's a number of Derek Warwick, Tom Christensen, who else is on there? Anyway, there's a whole group of people on there that I'm spacing out. Mika Salo, and all with driving experience. And we're supposed to be looking at it from a driver's perspective and try to make a fair ruling on the situation. Now, unfortunately, some of it's technical. Some of it could be a technical infringement on the car. You're still in there having to review that though. So it's fairly thankless job, to be honest with you.
I'm sure.
At best, you're going to please 51% of the people, but
Right.
there's somebody always upset. But I think I know I probably can speak for like Ari Leyendijk doing it for IndyCar.
For IndyCar, sure.
You also learn a tremendous amount about, what the rules are, to be honest with you.
I can imagine.
And also then what what creates the decision making on that situation where they do it. But and there's some very clever guys in the driver's side. But if I think it's about as fair as a situation as you can get. I don't think I've certainly never seen a lot of bias or anything like that. I mean, I knew Adrian Newey, for example, from back in the IndyCar days, and I've known Adrian for a long time. But one time at Abu Dhabi, we DQ'd his cars from qualifying because of something he was doing on the cars, and I had no qualms to agree that it was not fair.
Right.
So I don't think, even though you can be kind of friendlies with everybody, you're still trying to make a fair judgment. And with all the stewards on board, and there's some very experienced stewards on board. Tim Mayer's a great guy to work with on that. He's got a lot of knowledge on it, and some of the others. And we had great guidance up until his death. Charlie Whiting was a brilliant leader on that respect, because he was accepting other points of view, and he would listen to criticism, but he was fair, but he made a decision, but he was also very firm in the decision making. And I think you have to have that kind of open sponge, like, let me hear your point and listen to it, and think it might have merit, not having made a decision. And I think that's what you have to do. But as I say, it's not we're not a very popular.
I'm sure not, because like you said, at best, you're pleasing 51% of the people.
Yeah, but it's interesting. So, and it just keeps me kind of in the game, and I'll make 3 or 4 IndyCar races this year and stuff like that. Sadly, I couldn't go to Long Beach. We had a little bit of a tragedy back here in our community, and so we had some services that needed to take care of. So
sorry to hear that.
It's life. Anyway,
it is. All right. I don't want to wear out my welcome with you, because certainly we could talk for hours, and I know you got a busy schedule. Perhaps I can convince you to come back on and we can delve into some of these other stories that we didn't have time to get into today. But as we get ready to throw the checkered flag here, 7th year over FNs, Danny, I have one final question for you, my friend, as we get into rolling into the month of May. Any early favorites for the 500 win this year stick out in your mind?
Oh, I'm not sure how you could pick in the field that you've got for this year's Indy 500, and with the teams and the quality of the drivers and the team there. I don't think if this was an hour before the start of the race, you could pick somebody to win the Indianapolis 500.
That's probably a fair statement, because I think you're right, because it's on any given day, it could be any one of these multitude of teams and drivers that we've been talking about. So, all right, my friend, again, huge thanks to 1985 Indy 500 winner, 88 IndyCar Series champion, FIA steward, man about town. The man is busier than I can even imagine. I'm grateful that he's been willing to carve out the time today. Danny, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you back on, and hopefully I'll get a chance to see you in the month of May. Congratulations on your upcoming induction into the IMS Hall of Fame as well.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. We'll talk again soon.
You got it, Danny. Sounds great. Have a good one. Safe travels, and